You're listening online at heavensroadfm.com, Britain's only choice for Catholic radio. Thanks for being part of our show.
So welcome back to the show. This show is one of our shows to do with vocations. And bless her cotton socks, I am very excited today because I have got Sister Anne-Marie Buckley with me. She's a presentation sister. She lives just up the road from me, and she has been very kind this morning to give of her time just so that we can have a look at some of the work that she's done in her life and how it all began with her calling from God to be a nun. So I'm going to switch immediately over and bring in Sister Anne-Marie. So, good morning, Sister Anne-Marie.
Good morning, Father Jim.
It's very nice of you to give you some time to come and see me today. As I've explained to you, we are doing this on behalf of Heavens Road FM. We are doing a number of recordings to do with vocations, and it's not just vocations to a religious life and to the priesthood. We've done all sorts of things, including things like the kind of vocations that people are called to in work, and also the single life. So it's been a kind of a mix of all kinds of things. So perhaps you might just introduce yourself, tell me which order you belong to, and perhaps where you come from. That might be a nice start.
Okay, Father Jim, I'm Sister Anne-Marie Buckley, and I was born in a little place called Farrandoyle, not far from Mallow, and Mallow is quite close to Ballygriffin, where my foundress was born, and I'm a presentation sister, and I was founded by Nano from Ballygriffin, and I was born into a large family, and I think my greatest memory would be our fun and laughter, and the rosary at night after supper.
Oh, very holy people.
Now, the rosary was not without, because there were 9 of us, the rosary was not without giggles.
Oh, I'm sure, yeah. Well, it's an amazing thing, because I know that even now, my mother goes out every night. There's a little shrine to Our Lady just near where my mum lives in Ireland, and they nip out every night at 7 o'clock to say the rosary. So I always think, we in the UK really, we miss that. It's a great founding to the faith, I think.
Mm.
And so you're one of how many children? 9, 8 children?
7 boys and 2 girls.
Oh, so your parents were really hard workers.
We worked on a farm, and they were really hard workers. But we always had time for prayer, and although they had no cars in those days, it was a case of tackling up the horse and trap and going to mass. And the older ones would cycle, and then we would go with Mum and Dad, and we'd meet the neighbours, and there was a great community spirit, although we didn't recognise it then.
Yeah.
But looking back now, it was a great community spirit, because after Mass they'd all meet and chat, and believe it or not, the shops were open on Sunday morning, and they'd go shopping, and it was a kind of a social affair, a social event.
Mm.
And the children would play around with cousins and neighbours.
Do you know, it's a funny thing when you're talking about your childhood like that. I mean, many of the children today seem to think they've got it all, really. But, in some ways, they miss out on that wonderful community dimension that was back in those days, where the pleasures were very simple in life, and it was wonderful just to come together and have a chat and perhaps a potter around the shops with one another and, chat to the butchers. Very simple life that I think we've lost really these days.
I'm sure you're right.
So, tell me first of all now about the vocation. I mean, you've been a sister now for quite a few years.
Yes, more years than I'd like to admit. I've had my 60th.
Is that right? 60 years. Well, congratulations to you.
Thank you.
So when do you think that your vocation began? When did you feel a calling to enter the religious life?
Well, I had 2 aunts nuns. One was a blue nun in South Africa, and
a blue nun sounds like a bottle of
blue
wine.
Nun. No, the blue nuns.
No, never heard of them.
And the other was my aunt, Sister Anthony. She was my mother's sister. And the wonderful thing about her was she used to come home, to look for young girls. And she never went to school. She went to the homes.
Ah, right.
And I think that's where the vocation starts, really. And I remember as a young child, my mother and father saying, oh, she'll be a nun and he'll be a brother. And, I think the seed was sown somewhere in that area between my aunts coming home and my mother and father, mentioning, the ideal of the priesthood. And well, the Mass meant everything to the family because I suppose in those days they had very little else. It was a social event as well as, as well as the Mass, as well as the centre of our lives.
So what age would you be when you decided to go, to approach the order?
Well, that is telling a story. I was 14 and a half when I entered.
Wow!
And
I didn't even know they took girls that young.
Well, it was like a boarding school. There were 22 of us.
Ah, right.
And I entered in a place called Cressbrook in Derbyshire, near Millersdale. But the foundation place really was Buxton.
Right.
But the novitiate was in Cressbrook, as I said, and there were 22 of us. And it was difficult, but I think the seed was set, and the ideal was that we would be professed and we would give our life to Jesus. But I remember one day, I was only about 15 years of age, maybe a little bit older, and standing in the conservatory and looking over the hills, and I thought, Jesus, I can't give you everything when I see what you did, what your father did to you. And I think that in itself was a renewal. I was already saying, I'll give you everything, even though I didn't know what I was holding back at the time. But I had that sense of just giving everything. And so preparation for reception and profession, that was an ideal, that was a big thing. And we had a great novice mistress. She was a Dublin lady. She was Sister Cecilia Thackerbury. And afterwards she went on the missions, and she was killed in Biafra, actually. But she was a great woman. I still think of her.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, I actually pray to her because I think she was a saint.
Yeah. So you said, you were 14 and a half when you ended up going to the school. Was there a long period of making up your mind before that? Was it even earlier, or did you get some kind of calling and decide very quickly, or perhaps it was something that had always been inside you and it was just a natural progression? Which would it be, do you think?
The only thing I remember is that my aunt came home. She actually came home for my sister. My sister was entering. And before she came, a letter arrived. And when I came back from school, my mother was out doing something in the yard. And I went out to her and she said to me, I had a letter from Sister Anthony today. And I went into my sister then, who was preparing my dinner. She was 3 years older than me. And I said, Sister Anthony is coming. And she said, well, I'm not entering. and I said, well, I am.
Really?
I'll go with her. And that was it, really.
Because you knew when Sister Anthony was coming what she was going to ask you.
Well, she wasn't coming for me, she was coming for my sister. And yet...
Brilliant.
And yet my sister was the one that would kneel by the bedside at night praying, because we shared a room.
Yeah.
And I'd be in the bed singing and she'd be kneeling by the bed saying her novenas and her prayers. And
so you thought she was the holy one?
And I never remember praying. I'd be out in the yard kicking football with the lads.
Oh, well, sounds great, that. So, you then go to school. So, what age then? You do the novitiate, and then you go into orders, and then you take your final profession. How long does that kind of take?
Well, we had 6 months novitiate, 6 months postulancy, and then we received the habit.
Right.
And that was for 2 years.
How old were you when you received the habit then?
Well, 15 and a half.
Wow. Gosh.
And I made my profession at 17.
Yeah.
and they were my first vows. And then after that, we were studying, and we had private schools in different places. I went to Burton-on-Trent, and I went to Scunthorpe, and I helped out in the private schools.
So your order is a teaching order, is that right?
Oh yeah, it was founded for teaching of poor girls.
Yeah,
but of course it changed over the years.
Yeah, I mean, you've already mentioned the foundress was Nan O'Nagle. Now, she was from Cork or thereabouts. I know that I found out a little bit more about Nan O'Nagle, and she was a great woman. You know, she was a lady who kind of took on the establishment and decided that, you know, these poor children in Cork at the time who were getting no education, that she would set up her own school, and that was an awful brave thing to do, especially in those days, because I think she would have been quite, you know, those around her would have looked down on her really quite harshly. But she never gave up, did she? She was one of these who was a brilliant giver to the poor.
Yeah, what really happened to Nana was, like, she was like the place Ballygriffin, where she was born, very wealthy people, and like in the penal days there were no Catholic schools, so her mum and dad sent her off to France to a boarding school to be educated. And in her teenage years, one night she was come back from the ball, and of course in her carriage she was dreaming, and, you know, her dancing and her clothes, and she had the best of everything. But on the way back from the ball, it was early morning, and in France, and all these older people were outside the church wrapped up in their sackcloth and in the freezing cold, waiting for Mass. And she thought, they have everything, and I have nothing, I'm empty. And then she got the calling to go back to Ireland, which she did eventually. Yeah. And it was then she decided that she would give her life for, you know, for the poor.
So she was quite a wealthy woman then? Or from a wealthy family? Very wealthy. Right.
But all her money went to, you know, building the schools. Like in the early days, there were no schools. She would just gather them in groups, you know, in different corners of Cork City. Yeah. And eventually she spent her money building schools. But she looked after the elderly as well. In the morning she would, you know, when she became a nun, she would pray with her sisters, and then she would spend her day in schools, moving around different areas for different groups of children, and she would teach them the catechism. And then at night she'd come back and say her prayers with the community, and then she'd go down to the quays, and she had her lantern, and she was called the Lady of the Lantern.
That's the picture that we always see of her, isn't it? Carrying the lantern.
Yes. Yeah. And like she was years before Florence Nightingale, because, you know, she was a lady of the lantern. Yeah. But Nana, you know, and Nana was brave, and like she wasn't a very well woman. But at night, when everything was over and all the sisters had gone to bed, she would kneel in front of the Blessed Sacrament. And I think that really was her strength. There's where she got her energy.
So when was it then that she decided to pull friends together to make this congregation? Did that happen in her lifetime? Yes.
This happened in her lifetime because she needed help, and she 2 or 3 other women came to help her, and then they together prayed together, and they took their vows, and then, you know, the community grew then. She died and there were only 3 nuns, 3 sisters left, and, you know, they were around her, and she kept saying to them, look after the children, look after the poor. And that really was her mission. Yeah.
But I mean, it's true to say with her that, you know, from little acorns do great trees grow, because really, you know, if you look at what the Presentation Sisters have grown into, I mean, do you know how many countries that you're in? You're in...
Oh, we're all over. We're in every continent.
I know you're all over the world doing great work, really. And I mean, you know, when we talk about education orders, I think the one that might pop into people's heads most easily would be something like the Jesuits. I mean, the Jesuits are very well known for their education, and they're in every country. But I mean, you know, your order has done, you know, just as much, really. I mean, it's you've built schools, you've built convents, and, you know, you've done great work all around the world. And I know that a couple of years ago we had a big meeting here with a lot of your order came, and it was lovely to see so many people